Welcome to the Conservative Edge. I'm Dr. Joe Curry, your host. This show will give you an edge on the truth. It is about substance on each and every issue. Today's issue is federal, state, local benefits for illegal immigrants and their cost. We have four distinguished guests with us. Sitting to my right here is the former mayor of the city of Downey, currently councilman, and he's also an immigration lawyer. He and I will be discussing practically what is available at the state, the federal level, or even the local level to illegal immigrants. And then we are joined by Spence Raley from the Federation for Immigration Reform. He'll be joining us via Skype. And also we'll be joined by Steve Camarota, Center for Immigration Studies. Steve is already with us. Hello, Steve.
Hello.
Okay, I'm going to start with rather provocative questions or statements. I'll let you all react to it. If I were Mexico, the country of Mexico, and I was running the country of Mexico, and if I had a safety valve called the United States, so therefore if I have low employment possibilities, they could come here legally or illegally and work in the United States. If my educational system is too congested, some of them could come and be educated in the United States. It will not cost Mexico a penny in either case. And if my hospitals are too congested or providing low quality health care, they will come to this country legally or illegally in order to benefit from whatever healthcare system we have in this country. And that doesn't cost them anything either. So when all of these benefits accruing to Mexican citizens, it seems to me perfectly logical that an immigrant who is living, say, a below average lifestyle in Mexico would want to immigrate to the United States. So therefore, based on the human level and even the economic level, one would think why people would want to cross from Mexico to the United States. And of course, there are those who are selling drugs and all of that stuff, which we're not talking about. The majority of Mexicans are law-abiding citizens and they're trying to live a better lifestyle. What do you think, Mayor?
I think you're correct. I think the fact of the matter is the vast majority of people, if they have an opportunity to better themselves, they will take whatever action they need to better themselves and their family. As you said, the vast majority of people, immigrants from all over the world, come to this country they abide by the law, and they come for the basic reasons of being healthy, having a job, and to trying to provide for the family. That is true.
Yeah. Steve, you have a comment on that?
Right. I mean, this has long been the case that in general, Mexico has not have a great incentive to reduce the flow of its citizens coming to the United States because it is, if they have difficulty finding housing or education or employment, it makes sense that they let them leave. Now, granted, the Mexican Constitution actually it prevents the government from stopping people from leaving. And in general, that's true for the United States. We wouldn't stop people from leaving. So one thing I would emphasize is if we want to curtail illegal immigration, it's up to us. We can't rely on other countries. No one else has our interests at heart but us. So enforcing our immigration laws is our responsibility.
Well, I must add that the immigrants right now, most of the recent immigrants, Steve, as you very well know, most of the recent immigrants coming from Latin America are not Mexican, at least in the last, say, 12 months. And that means the attraction that we provide for immigrants from Latin America is so substantial that everybody wants to leave, for example, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and so on and so forth to come to this country. Furthermore is many of the people who are here illegally are people who are, say, from Europe and who overstayed their visa. So it's a complex equation, but the majority of illegal immigrants in the United States are Mexicans. I understand 60%.
That's true, Dr. Curry. I think sometimes it's complex because the immigrant experience from where people come is different, generally speaking, country to country. The experience of a Cuban is, and the reasons for coming maybe, or more likely, are going to be very different from someone coming from Central America. Recently, we've seen an influx. People come from Venezuela because of the political turmoil there. So sometimes the answer isn't so clear cut. We're seeing recently the issue, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a few minutes, regarding the separations of children from the family members, and the issue about asylum. The whole issue about asylum is a very complex issue that may be different from the experience that you may be referring to, which is people just coming for financial reasons. And that's something that needs to be distinguished, I think. As an immigration attorney, I know that the differences are quite vast. And sometimes we can't paint with a broad brush those differences because the motive for which they come, where if it's political or not, is completely different.
Okay, Steve, you want to add something to this?
Well, right. To remind your listeners, someone who's coming for asylum faces persecution. The vast majority of illegal immigrants, even those who apply for asylum to try to qualify for it so they can stay permanently and get, a green card and so forth, are not people who do qualify for it. They're mostly people in search of a better life and choose to cross our borders illegally or overstay a temporary visa. They don't qualify for asylum. Asylum is a specific thing, but it greatly complicates enforcement because you have to adjudicate the asylum
Correct.
claim. When someone claims that they're persecuted, then you have to look into their individual case. Are they a member of a union where they were trying to organize, or did they express a political opinion in their home country? Asylum, just to remind your listeners, is not something to just to give somebody a chance to live in the United States because of very unpleasant conditions or deprivation in their home country. It involves specifically persecution, which the vast majority of illegal immigrants or immigrants generally don't face.
Yeah, Steve, just to emphasize your point, 80% of those who are coming in asking for asylum do not qualify, and many of them were found to be lying about their status in their home country.
So maybe another way to think about that real briefly is, if you're applying for asylum, the idea is you're fleeing for your life, that things are that bad. But of course, if you fled through several countries to get here, including Mexico, which has an asylum system and grants thousands of people asylum every year, if you're going right through Mexico and not applying there, then you're really not so much fleeing for your life, but you're looking for a better life, which might be understandable, but that's very different than the purpose of asylum.
Exactly. Now let's say a couple of words about this the situation right now with the border. If I understand it correctly, you could come to the regular port of entry, claim that you are being persecuted, and you ask for asylum. If you have a child with you, the child will stay with you if you enter through the port of entry. However, what they're trying to do, some of them, they're bringing their kids. They try to come illegally to this country, which is at least a misdemeanor, right, attorney?
Yes.
It is a misdemeanor the first time.
Pursuant to, yes.
Exactly. And then suddenly the children are separated from their parents because now their parents are illegally in this country. They have committed a crime, and now the kids will have to be taken away from them. Is that the situation, or am I exaggerating?
Well, hot off the press, President Trump, I think within the last hour, said he's going to sign an executive order that's not going to separate the children from those particular applicants. You're right. Typically, what happens is a person, if they go to the port of entry, or they cross outside the port of entry, they present themselves, or they get caught with a border patrol or border patrol agent. They will get what's called a credible fear interview. Usually, and this is the problem with the system right now, is the credible fear interview. Typically, in my experience, having several cases, doesn't occur sometimes for many days. So what do you do in the meantime? You have to secure those people. You have to house them. You have to put them in a detention center. And the issue has become, when they come with their family members, in the past, they would typically keep at least a mother with a child while that process takes place. Recently, the Trump administration said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to separate the kids from the parents while the process takes place. One of the challenges, I think we can all agree, that the immigration system needs to be an entire overhaul, is that those asylum cases oftentimes take many months and sometimes even years. It has been past practice that if the people qualify, they go before an immigration judge, or sometimes even just before the deportation officer, they're released pending their case before an immigration judge.
Yeah, but the
And
problem
hence-
with that, attorney, is that they never come back.
And that is the problem. You're absolutely correct. The problem is that's what they call the catch and release. People get lost in the system. They get released. They get legal opinion that says, you don't have a good case. You come from, and I'm being very general here, you come from some area in Mexico where they want to claim that there's a high crime rate. Well, the fact of the matter is, just because you come from a high crime ridden area, that is not sufficient grounds to seek asylum. As the other speaker said earlier, the grounds for asylum are if you're going to be, if you return to your country and you will be persecuted, tortured on account of either your race, religion, membership in a social group, and some other categories. And so being from an area where there's a high crime rate, it simply isn't enough.
Okay, Steve, do you have something quickly on that?
Well, just to remind you listeners, one of the big challenges here is experience has shown that it is very hard to create an institutional setting where children are at least treated well. Doesn't mean that every case is abusive or anything. It's the whole reason in America that we moved away from an orphanage system to the foster care system, which itself has problems, but reminds us that in almost every institutional setting, problems emerge with children. So if you hold children who get caught at the border coming in with their parents, then these problems often emerge. But if you then release the child with the parents into the United States, you've encouraged lots more people to risk the journey, bring their kids with them, and come illegally. And so maybe that's helpful, putting aside the law for a minute, but just think about the dilemma or the box we're in. If you release everyone, you get a lot more illegal immigration. If you try to hold the children with their family or just separately, you create a whole new set of problems. And so trying to square that circle is not easy.
Agreed. Now, what we would like to do right now, Steve and Alex, is to run through all of the benefits that accrue to illegal immigrants. I'm going to start with the sanctuary law in California. And many people would say, well, this is all catch and release or whatever, and basically is a way to disobey federal law. I'm going to read exactly what the law, not verbatim, but mostly what the law says. The law prohibits detaining an individual on a hold request from the federal government unless there is a felony or a warrant for his arrest or her arrest. Transferring immigrants into federal custody with some exceptions. They prohibit the transfer of immigrants into federal custody with some exceptions. Asking about a person's immigrant status or sharing any information with the feds that is not available to the general public. And we also passed a law in 2013 prohibiting police from detaining immigrants for a long time, longer than usual, longer than necessary. Otherwise, they'll have to inform ISIS about their presence. Does that present all kinds of complications? And can the federal government tell the state that you cannot do that? Or do they have to file a lawsuit?
Well, sure. It presents several challenges. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of people that are in the criminal system are at the state level, not at the federal level. So there does need to be a level of cooperation between the state and federal agencies. I think that that law I think you're referring to has created quite a bit of problems with that communication, and we've seen the result with several high-profile cases.
Like Stanley's case.
Exactly. So I think that yes, the fact of the matter is that the immigration laws are federal jurisdiction, and it's created a big set of problems. So.
But the state in this case is really trying to tell the federal government how to run basically the immigration system, which they have nothing to do with.
Well, to a certain extent, we're not necessarily telling them how to run it. They're just saying, look, we're not going to cooperate. That's your deal. You guys do what you have to do, but it's not going to be. We're not going to necessarily cooperate or provide the information that you necessarily all the information you necessarily want.
But what if the illegal immigrant is in their custody,
In the federal custody or state?
in the state custody?
Well, I think that's the issue here.
Right.
Is that law said unless it is a felony or some other violent crime, they're not going to report it. One of the items that you mentioned is 2013, the law passed that said the state agency, or local for that matter, can't keep somebody longer than would be necessary pursuant to their sentencing to wait for the federal authorities to come and check on them and pick them up. I think that's also one of the issues that you mentioned.
But Steve, all of these things I just mentioned have cost. They have cost to the federal government or the state government. And so the lack of coordination is problematic per se, right? But
Right.
somebody
So
is paying the
give you
cost.
a quick, let me give you a quick, your listeners, a quick understanding maybe this way. So what happens is everybody who gets arrested, their names, fingerprints, so forth, gets submitted to the federal government because they want to see if there's a warrant. You might be wanted somewhere else, you might be an escaped prisoner. So the federal government tries to tells the jurisdiction, hey, this person's wanted for murder or something somewhere else. Now, what they also have been doing is checking against immigration records. Is this person previously deported? Are they wanted on an immigration warrant? That sort of thing. Is this person illegally in the country? So then when that happens, the federal government comes back to the state jurisdiction and says, hey, we'd like you to hold this person 24 hours. We're going to come by and pick him up. He's an illegal immigrant. He's previously deported, what have you. And what these states and cities do say is absolutely not. We are going to purposefully, as a matter of policy, release this person back into the community, even though the federal government said that they were going to come pick him up. And the federal government even has a program that compensates a jail, say, for someone in this circumstance, pays for that person to be in jail. Nonetheless, they won't even hold them for any length of time. They release them in the community. That's what happened, say, in the Kate Steinle case. And so enormous number of crimes in the thousands have been committed by people that the federal government asked the jurisdiction to hold, somebody who'd been previously arrested, and the jurisdiction, as a matter of policy, released that person. So that's the outrageous part. And then what's happened is the Trump administration has tried to withhold some federal funds with some success to these jurisdictions, but essentially they've gotten courts to come in and say, no, you can't do that. I mean, at this point, you can find a court to overrule any Trump decision. Now, eventually, I'm guessing that when this makes it to the higher courts or the Supreme Court, what the Trump administration is doing will be upheld. They will be able to withhold funds. But right now, that they're being precluded from that by, I think, very activist judges who really just don't like Trump.
The point that concerns me here, no longer than necessary. Who determines what is necessary? Clearly, some state employee or some state security person. And for their benefit, they could say any detention is costly to the state, and therefore, as soon as the guy comes in, we're going to release him in the public domain. In other words, there is no incentive for the state to hold on to the guy, even if the federal government wants it.
Right, no, they don't. They purposefully don't hold them. That's
Okay.
the point.
So that's my
What
point.
they're saying is we'll only hold them as long as their drunk driving charge is valid or whatever we're going to do with drunk driving. But as soon as we're finished with prosecuting for that, we release them even if the federal government identified this person as having committed a serious crime, had been previously deported, and the federal government is asking the county to hold the person. The county, as a matter of policy, still releases that person back into the community.
Well,
That's what the sanctuary
I
policies
disagree
are.
with respect to the serious crime. I don't believe that this applies to serious crimes or violent felonies.
No, but that's if the case, if there's a warrant for that person. But let's say somebody committed a serious crime, has been previously deported, they served their time, the Immigration Service deported them somewhere, and the person came back illegally. Now, they're no longer wanted for that rape or murder or robbery anymore, but it's still a felony to be in the United States illegally, having been previously deported. But the jurisdiction isn't going to hold that person just because the federal government asked them to, because this is a previously deported person, even if the previous crime was very serious. You see what I'm saying? Now, if there's a warrant for that person on a serious crime, then they would hold them, but not just someone who's returned after being deported, even though that itself is a felony. You see the difference?
Those who come to this country illegally and they have kids, the kids are now being separated from their parents. whatever President Trump is going to do is going to rejoin the kid with the parent, correct? So that parent, the only reason the parent will come back, right, after he gets a hearing, will be at least to pick up the kid. So if
Right,
we
I mean,
if we
that gets-
release if the parent is allowed into the general public, and the kid is with the parent, the incentive to come back will be almost zero.
Well,
Right?
I mean, presumably. I mean, on the other hand, you know, I mean, to what extent are you going to be using a child as a chattel to incentivize someone to come back?
But they have to come back in 20 days.
No, I understand. I don't know.
They could only hold them for 20 days, and then they are released to the general public. During that period, the child is being treated by the federal government. They're eating, they're drinking, they're receiving medical care, and so on and so forth. And then the parent. The other problem is, I just heard that on television this morning, about 1,000 of these kids, 1,000 of these kids showed up on their own.
Right, and that's a whole other issue.
I mean, my goodness gracious.
That's
So how
another
do you
issue.
know which the parent is telling the truth that this is my child? And how do you know, how could you get information from the child himself or herself? And then how do you rejoin those two, given that the parent does not receive, that does come back and does not receive.
And as the speaker said earlier, I mean, it's very complex. Not only that, you also have identification issues. A lot of people come without any formal documents to identify, you know, the birth certificate or whatnot.
Sometimes deliberately.
And sometimes deliberately. So,
Yeah, okay.
So that.
Driver's licenses. In California, as a state law, driver's licenses, they are allowed to have driver's licenses in California. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Health services. If you show up at a county hospital, they have to treat you no matter what. Whether you have money, don't have money, you have insurance, don't have insurance, they have to treat you. Is that correct?
They have to treat, they have to triage you and treat you for any immediately emergency medical condition you may have.
All right. Now, tuitions. I have taught at the University of California, and some of my students were illegal immigrants. They came in there, and they are, some of them have received some kind of scholarships, but some of them pay in-state tuition, although they are illegally in this country. So that has its own cost, and I'm sure your center has taken those costs into consideration. If they are at high school age or grammar school age, they could go to school, any school, they could go to school for free, they receive lunches and medical care. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Yes, illegal immigrants would be eligible for free school lunch and public education. They would never turn an illegal immigrant away.
All right. But this has its own cost.
Absolutely.
California does not prohibit rentals to illegal immigrants. So if you show up at say an apartment building and say you want to rent that, whether you are legal or illegal does not matter, and they cannot discriminate against you. That's the state law in California, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
That is correct.
All right. Illegals can obtain professional licenses. They can become lawyers. Is that correct?
Yes, now in California, yes.
Recently, yes.
Recently, yes. Illegals cannot be asked whether they are legal or illegal if they are serving on a jury. Effectively, an American citizen can be tried in the court of law where the majority could be illegal immigrants.
Well,
it's not very likely, but it is possible.
Well, I think that's a little more complicated. I think at that point, the individual will be committing perjury by serving on a jury. To be on a jury, on a registration card, you have to verify whether you're either a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. So ultimately, if a person does serve on a jury, they will have some legal issues down the line as far as immigration, potentially even criminal matters. So I'm not sure if that's wholly true.
All right. Well,
Would you agree?
Well, I mean, the law passed that you
yeah,
cannot ask.
so we know for a federal jury, you couldn't. In fact, one of the ways people have been studying non-citizens registering to vote is the illegal immigrants or non-citizens show up, and there's a whole bunch who've been excluded from serving on federal juries. Now, at the state level, it depends on how robust that system is or how it's enforced, and I'm not sure in California. So could an illegal immigrant be on a jury? Sure. I don't think there's that many, but yeah, I think it can happen.
Yeah, but Steve, a special law was passed by in California forbidding people from being asked forbidding authorities from asking illegal immigrants whether they are illegal or legal in this country. Anyhow.
Yeah, and that's applied to the jury pool, right? So yeah, I'm just not sure.
Okay.
I can't. I'm
Now,
not sure.
the custody issue and the jail issue. I understand that in 2014, illegal immigrants accounted for 36.7% of federal sentences. 36.7%. That's almost 1/3 of all of the sentences are for illegal immigrants. However, if they are convicted and they are in jail, we have to pay for their jail, right? We have to pay for their medical services and everything else associated with keeping somebody in custody. And the cost of that is absolutely huge.
Oh, well, of course, it runs into the billions of dollars. Let me tell you the statistics I have. Between 2011 and 2016, 44% of people sentenced in federal court were not U.S. citizens. The overwhelming majority are illegal immigrants. However, a lot of that is immigration crime.
Right.
If you take out all the immigration crime, 21% were not citizens. Now, overall, so that's 21% of non-immigration crimes at the federal level, where the data is the best, were non-citizens. And to put that into perspective, non-citizens are only 8% of the adult population, and illegal immigrants are only 4% of the nation's total adult population, but 21% of those sentenced in federal court. So that really does suggest a real problem. Most of that 21% would be illegal immigrants. So you're looking at somewhere around 5 times their share of federal non-immigration federal crimes being sentenced for. So that's a pretty big number. However, I would point out it doesn't mean that for a state crime where most crimes are prosecuted, that's the case. But it does mean in the one place where we have really good data, it does look like a lot of illegal immigrants are being sentenced. But again, that's
it's a
not
large
necessarily
number
true
in
for
all
states.
cases, Steve. We are talking about a prisoner costing the state or the federal government about what, $25,000 to $30,000 a year?
Oh, more than that at the federal
More than
level.
that.
I think it's like 40,000.
Okay,
Yeah.
40,000. And that's a huge amount of money considering the numbers that are involved in here. Yes, you may call it that 4%, but America has the largest prison population in the universe.
Now remember, let me go over that again. Illegal immigrants are about 4% of the total adult population in the United States.
Yeah.
Maybe like 8 or 9 million out of 230 million. But they're 21% of people being sentenced to prison at the federal level.
That's
so
what I
that
meant.
means that their rate of being sentenced is vastly out of proportion to their share of the total population. At least that's true for the non-citizens. Since most of these non-citizens are illegal immigrants, then that's what's disconcerting.
Are you
So
referring to non-citizens that are residents, or they're people that just don't have any documentation whatsoever?
Yeah, so all we know for sure from the sentencing data is they're non-citizens. About 8% of the adult population is non-citizens. 21% of the people being sentenced in federal court are non-citizens. So that's
Got it.
about 3 times.
Yeah.
But most of those non-citizens appear to be illegal immigrants, though some are lawful permanent residents, some are foreign students who committed a crime, that sort of thing. A small number would be tourists who committed a crime who were originally legal or something. But what that suggests is, at least in the one place we have good data at the federal level, non-citizens and almost certainly illegal immigrants, who make up most of that, are committing crimes well out of proportion.
Are
to their
you?
share, at least at
Do
the
you
federal
have
level.
data? Can you provide data as to whether that percentage has been consistent over the course of the last 50 to 100 years? When obviously we've always had an enormous immigrant experience in the U.S. Is that percentage consistent with how it's been in the past, or has there been an increase?
To the best of my knowledge, but this could be not true, we don't have non-citizen data, incarceration, say at the federal level, going back many decades. In general, the rise in non-citizen incarceration, as I understand it, or in sentencing, on these statistics I'm going over,
Okay.
has generally paralleled the rise in the number of immigrants in the United States.
Steve, I have to move on. According to my research, 41% of all illegal immigrants receive public assistance. Is that consistent with your research?
Well, just so we understand, what I've done is look at households, right? and look at households that are likely headed by illegal immigrants in a survey called the Survey of Income and Program Participation, where they actually ask some questions about your immigration status. It looks like about 62% of households, when you use that survey, receive some form of welfare. Primarily, but not exclusively, there's the food assistance programs.
Yeah, but they cannot
food
receive it
stamps,
the first
WIC,
5 years are here. Is that correct?
Yes, that statistic I think
Okay.
you're talking
However,
about is new immigrants.
however, generous as we are in California, LA County, between 2013 and 2016, spent $1.3 billion in welfare benefits. These are to people who are in this country illegally and recently, and therefore the 5-year limit has been circumvented by the city of Los Angeles.
Right now, I'm not sure which data you're speaking of, but it's important for your listeners to note that a lot of the welfare that illegal immigrants use, and it's big, the dollars run into the tens of billions, is on behalf of U.S.-born children. So a person comes to the United States, makes very little money, and they have 2 children. And then together they're in poverty. And so then the children qualify for Medicaid, free school lunch, and you can actually live in public housing if you're illegal, but your children aren't. And you might even get a check in the form of TANF, temporary assistance to needy families, or SSI. But the check technically is going to the U.S.-born child. That's very common. Less common is an illegal immigrant who is directly enrolled in a welfare program. Pregnant women or women who just had a child can be on Medicaid. Children can be on Medicaid if they're illegal. They also can get WIC and free school lunch. But in general, the illegal immigrants themselves, unless they're committing fraud, or there might be a policy in a particular state, which you've alluded to, but in general, it's a lot of the welfare is received on behalf of U.S.-born children. That's why you either face a choice here. Either you enforce the law, reduce illegal immigration, and avoid the costs, or you're going to just be paying out these benefits because the U.S.-born children, you're not going to be able to cut them off from welfare because we're giving them automatic citizenship and thus welfare eligibility.
I appreciate the clarification, Steve. The impact on wages, very important. Many estimates say, well, they really don't have an impact on wages because Americans do not want to compete for those types of jobs. Most of the studies indicate between 10 and 20%. Is that consistent with your work?
10 and 20%
Well,
In other words, they lower the average wage in the lower bracket. Say, for example, this is the lowest classification of the type of work that could be done, say, menial work or babysitting services or gardening or so on and so forth. In those areas, they've lowered wages between 10 and 20%. There is a lot of controversy, in fact, about this kind of research. I'm not quoting it authoritatively. However, I do suggest that there is a cost associated with that. Did you find anything in that regard, Steve?
Right. Well, you can try using some basic methods to try to estimate the impact of immigration on American workers. And if you do that, you can overall, you can show that based on basic economic theory, by increasing the supply of workers, immigration likely, for those in competition with immigrants, there's a lot of caveats here, may reduce wages by about $400 billion a year. But for employers, the lower wages does not just vanish into thin air. It can be retained by employers in the form of higher profits by an equal amount. So the average American might not be any worse off because some Americans who are employers gain, those who are workers might lose. If you just focused in on illegal immigrants who make up around a quarter to a third of those workers, then of that 400 billion, you could say a quarter to a third might be due to illegal immigrants. So you're looking between $1 and $200 billion in lower wages possibly for natives. But again, that money doesn't disappear. It goes to the employer, or sometimes might even get passed on to the consumer in the form of lower prices. The problem is the workers who face the competition from the illegals, who are not most Americans, are already the poorest. So that's the real concern, that the illegal immigrants, who overwhelmingly are people who have only a high school education in their home country or not even a high school education, tend to work at the bottom end of the labor market and they tend to compete with the least educated Americans. So the people who take it on the chin are the poorest, and the people who tend to benefit are owners of capital who tend to have a lot more resources. That's
Steve,
one of the biggest
as a professor of finance, I've taught finance in 45 countries. over 35 years. I could tell you categorically, if you pay the American enough money, he will do all of these so-called dirty jobs or menial jobs that the illegal immigrants are supplying, where the illegal immigrants are supplying labor. We don't pay them enough, and if we pay them enough, there would be no problem in us finding Americans to do our gardening and to do our babysitting. But we cannot dwell on that, so I have to move.
Can I just say one other thing?
Yeah.
I mean, you can actually look at this, and it turns out almost every job you could name in America, even when you look at hundreds of occupations, is the most people who do it. 51% of the maids in the United States are U.S. born, as are 58% of the taxi drivers and chauffeurs, as are 66% of the people who are construction laborers. Most of the toughest low-paid jobs are already done by Americans. Just to your point, if you raised wages, you could attract more workers there. It's silly to argue that these are jobs Americans don't do, since in fact most of the people already doing them are U.S. born.
Great point. We have about 4 million illegal immigrants in California alone, and I see many of them on the highway. Congestion on the highway is a very costly process. Many people spend in California to get to work, for me, just to get here, driving 50 miles, distance of 20 miles, took me an hour and a half this morning. Cost of congestion on the highway in medical offices and so on and so forth. Are these costs included in your studies?
No, I mean, obviously there are about 17 million illegal immigrants in the United States and their children. That must have some effect on things like congestion and traffic, but I have not seen a study that tries to look at. When I consider the fiscal impact of immigrants and their lifetime taxes paid versus services used, I have not looked at that question.
Yeah, but we Americans are driving on those highways. Congestion means increased cost of fuel and so on and so forth, depreciation on the cars and everything else. My point here is I could see, in fact, I'll be happy to discuss with you separately how we could really estimate the cost of this. We know what each average American, how many miles they drive per year. We know what if you have so many on the, I mean, this is doable, I assure you, and therefore these costs hopefully will be included. But if you are focused on the cost to the federal government or the state government or to the city government, that will be not a priority item. We are going to take a break right now for a couple of minutes, and this is The Conservative Edge. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to The Conservative Edge. We're talking about the cost of illegal immigration right now to the state, the counties, and to the federal government. With us, two very distinguished guests. They do most of the research, at least that I have seen, most of the credible research on these costs. Spence Raley is with the Federation for Immigration Reform, otherwise referred to as FAIR. And Steve Camarota, who's been with us throughout the show, is from the Center for Immigration Study. Welcome to both of you. And now we have, it's just to bring Spence up to date, we have been talking about the various elements of these costs. The various elements of these costs. Healthcare costs, education costs, and so on and so forth. Instead of getting to the minutiae right now, can we talk about the biggest item that your organization have found in terms of the cost first to the federal government, then to the state government, then to the county government? Let's start with the federal government. Spence, you want to start telling us what are the major components of the cost to the federal government?
Yes, absolutely. Last year, FAIR did a study on the costs of illegal immigration to state and federal governments. And what we found is that illegal immigration costs the federal government and the states net cost of $116 billion.
That's to both,
and
right?
Contrary to
that's for both the state and the federal.
Yes, that's for both the state and federal governments.
And what I remember from your study, I've read your study thoroughly, believe it or not, and I did a show based on your study earlier. But if I remember correctly, most of the cost is incurred by the state itself, by the states, because they provide the healthcare and the education.
Yes, yes. The vast majority of the costs are borne by state governments. The federal government, which ends up setting a lot of the laws that impact the states, they only incur about 40 billion of the entire cost that fall to taxpayers.
So the rest, if we said 114 billion, right?
The total cost to taxpayers is 116 billion. The federal
116.
government incurs
If
40
you take
billion.
40, if you take 40 from that, is about $75 billion paid by the state governments to educate, provide health care, and so on and so forth for illegal immigrants. Is that correct?
Yes, that's approximately the net cost, somewhere between 75 and 84 billion.
Steve, does that take in consideration? Does that take in consideration the net benefit, financial benefit of illegal people here illegally employment and producing? What is your number there?
Well, really, the taxes and benefits paid by illegal aliens to the United States is very minimal. At the state level, it's no more than approximately.
It's got to be. It's more than taxes. There's more benefits than just taxes.
Exactly. But the taxes that they pay, they don't amount to much of anything at the state level. In fact, it's only about $3 billion. But you have to look, in addition to what they may provide in terms of goods and services, you have to look at what they're taking away. What jobs are they taking away from American citizens or legal aliens that we would bring in to do those jobs, in addition to many other factors as well.
Yeah, but Spence, I think what Attorney Saab is talking about here is that the mere fact that they're providing labor in the state, in other words, the fact that they're increasing the supply of labor. Say, for example, in the state of Texas, they had a huge shortage of construction workers. They literally had to get a special permission from the federal government to bring in construction workers from Mexico. That in of itself alleviated the shortage and provided any disruption in the construction industry in Texas. Do these benefits...
That's assuming there actually is a shortage in the state of Texas. What that really comes down to is there are employers and there are construction employers who are not paying the market wage. Texas itself actually still has a relatively high amount of people who are not participating in the workforce or who are underemployed. It's just illegal labor. These illegal aliens will work at a much lower price point than is averaged by the market.
So wouldn't the unemployment rate be higher in Texas then?
No. Do you want me to answer that question?
Yeah,
for you?
Yeah, please, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, here's how the unemployment rate is calculated. You take only the people who've looked for a job in the last 4 weeks, and then you divide that by all the people who've looked in the last 4 weeks, plus all the people who are actually working. So let's say you looked 5 weeks ago. You're not in the numerator or denominator. Let's say you're discouraged and you haven't looked for a while. You're not in the numerator and denominator. So what's happened in America is the number of people who are officially looking for jobs, that is in the last 4 weeks, in the household survey, that's how we calculate the unemployment rate, has declined dramatically. That's all good news. It was once higher. What hasn't declined practically at all is all those people who are of working age, who seem able to work, but are out of the workforce and don't show up. So that's why people talk about things like labor force participation. Labor force participation is the share of, say, working age people, and you can measure that 18 to 65 or 16 to 64, but usually in that kind of range, is the share of people who are seemingly of working age but are not working. And that number hasn't improved practically at all. And the number who are out of the labor force but are of working age seems to have stayed about the same despite the improvement in the economy. The other point to make is, if employers are desperately short of workers, why aren't wages rising rapidly? There are some places where wages have risen rapidly, North Dakota. We can also look at certain occupations, just to give you an example, like petroleum engineer. The data shows their wages have gone way up with the fracking revolution in the last decade. But for nannies, maids, busboys, construction laborers, there's not much wage growth. And the number of less educated people who often do this kind of work, who are out of the labor force, still looks to be extraordinarily high. And that's why a lot of people are skeptical of the argument that we are desperately short of workers, even in a state where you might think, the economy's pretty good, like Texas. The fact is, the number of people out of the workforce in Texas who are of working age remains at or near a record level, and that's
okay, but
what's
Steve, I think the question has something to do with labor market disruptions or labor market inefficiencies. As you know, to go from unemployment to employment is not an immediate thing. To go from one type of job to another type of job is not an immediate thing. So given that there are disruptions in the labor market, shortages at time in the labor market, do illegal immigrants make up for that difference, make up for the shortage? Do they smooth over the disruptions? And to the extent they can do that, therefore, there is a value to that which should be incorporated in your analysis. Do you agree? Spence?
Right. So most people who do this kind of, you could incorporate anything, right? Maybe you think, and this is the kind of argument you're trying to make, is that, look, immigrants can complement the skills of natives, or maybe an immigrant might invent something. That can be true. But then if you started to include that, then what if immigration reduced the wages of certain groups of natives and made them more likely to need government services? What if an immigrant came in and committed a crime or some had destructive behavior? Wouldn't that damage the economy, right? Most people sort of say, well, we'll put all that aside and we'll just try to look at all the taxes immigrants pay and all the services they use. And I have tried to do that and then try to look at it over the lifetime. And the National Academy of Sciences has some estimates of the fiscal impact by educational attainment, and that's what I use, and then I adjust it for illegality, and I think you can come up with a reasonable estimate of the total fiscal balance between what illegal immigrants might pay in their lifetime and might use in services in their lifetime.
Okay.
But you're right, there can be issues outside of that fiscal balance, positive and negative,
I got it.
that you might want to take into account.
Yeah, Spence, I want to come back to the point of taxes paid. The taxes you mentioned said they pay very little taxes. We are talking about income tax. We're not talking about sales tax. Is that correct?
We're looking at a number of different taxes. In fact, we look at state level income tax, which honestly is a lot lower than people would think, because California has a set bracket for different incomes. Texas has no state income tax. Florida has no state income tax. So just by that factor alone, the income tax paid at the state level by illegal aliens is a lot lower than you would think in accordance to a nationwide average. But we also look at other taxes as well. We look at what they may be paying into Social Security at the federal level. We look at things such as
about sales tax. Sales tax. Did you look at
taxes.
sales tax?
Excuse me?
Sales tax in California, the sales tax is about 8.5%.
Yes, we did our best to incorporate sales tax into our figures as well.
Okay,
now,
so
an interesting
in
thing to note
total,
with sales
Spence, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you a little bit, but
Yeah, no
the
problem.
question here is this: from the $116 billion that you mentioned, that takes you take out of that the taxes, and then we could talk about the net cost, or is that the net cost?
That's the net cost. The 116 billion is actually the net cost. The gross cost is closer to 135 billion.
I see. Okay. Now, is there anything else you're doing right now in terms of your research to further illustrate to further define these costs to the federal, state, and the county level?
We're always looking at trying to find ways to become more precise. And honestly, what we're finding is more and more data from the federal government is being digitized and put online. I'm finding spreadsheets and costs that I wasn't able to find online just a few short years ago. So that helps a lot. In addition, we're trying to come up with a way to be more precise with rates of criminality and incarceration of illegal aliens. That'll give us a better view of the justice costs and just various things like that.
Okay. Final point, if I may. Why would any country voluntarily pay $116 billion to host people who are here illegally, no matter what benefits accrue from them? Conceptually, on the ground level, at the philosophical level, why would that be something that we as a country have to accept as opposed to vigilantly demonstrate or exclude from our economic life?
Well, let me answer your question this way. There are a lot of people in the United States, both on the left and then on the libertarian right, who think that, in effect, border control is illegitimate. That people who want to move from Iowa to Wisconsin to get a better job are no different than someone who wants to move from El Salvador to Wisconsin to get a better job. That the border is just an abstraction. It's a form of government oppression. People have a right to live wherever they want, and they can come and do that. So it sort of views sort of the United States as kind of like the oceans, kind of owned by everyone. And that view, while it may seem extremist and not that of many Americans, in the intellectual leadership of the Democratic Party and the Libertarian right, which has a lot of influence in the business community and the Republican Party, that view that border control is oppressive, that it stifles human freedom, that and that's especially on the right. On the left, it's the West kind of owes low-income people from around the world the right to move to their societies because the West is kind of bad and evil. But the point is, they both come to the same position. Immigration control is evil and racist and ultimately illegitimate. And that view, while again extreme and not really reflected by most Americans who think that we should be able to decide who comes in, it does have a lot of influence in policy circles in various ways. So that might answer your question and may surprise you, but I run into it all the. For example, the Cato Institute, they're a large libertarian think tank. Alex Nowrasteh, who works there, he'll repeatedly say that countries don't have any rights to stop who comes in. People have a right. The individual, any right that the nation has doesn't exist. The individual has a right to move and live where he pleases. And so that perspective is, well, it may not be mainstream. It is kind of mainstream in that big, powerful organizations like Cato that influence the Republican Party take that view.
Thank you, Steve. Spence, final words, please.
I think Steve put that very well in describing why some people would like to see our border control essentially eviscerated. But I think this is the view of most Americans as well when it comes to border security. Essentially what this does is when you don't control your borders, you allow a large number of people to be imported into the country, becoming a net burden to the American people. They end up the cost associated with their moving here and getting on government welfare programs, taking jobs and so forth, ends up becoming more than what we should willingly be willing to pay. It also undermines those who want to come to the United States in the proper manner and go through all the proper routes, and it undermines our rule of law. As a principle, we should not desire to have people enter the United States who are willing to do so illegally, because it just shows they don't have a fundamental respect for a rule of law in the United States. And if you don't have that fundamental respect, how do we know that you can be a benefit to our society, that you won't break other laws as well?
Thank you, Spence. But just as a footnote to all of this, the United States in 2017 issued 80,000 permanent residency to Mexican citizens. 80,000. So anybody who wants to come to this country, they could come here legally. We will understand why they're coming here, what they're going to be doing in here, and really what kind of benefit they provide to our society. So merit-based immigration system is the answer. The answer is not illegal immigration, in my opinion. Thank you all for being with us. I'm grateful for your participation. You've done a wonderful job. Alex, thank you so much for being here with us. And now we will stop, and then we will spend 10 minutes with Arthur Schapper, who will make a commentary on everything that you just heard. Thank you. This is The Conservative Edge.
Thank you.
This is The Conservative Edge. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the conversation we just had on illegal immigration and its cost at the federal level, the state level, and the county level. Listening to all of these commentaries you just heard and all the points that were made is a very active expert on immigration, and he is a blogger, he's a writer, and he's a commentator. We invited him to sit here, listen to all of these points that were made, and to make comments about any point he wishes, or to add or subtract from whatever was said. Arthur, welcome. Nice to
Thank
have
you so
here.
much. Yes.
Pleasure.
Want to just add to your audience, let them know I write for Town Hall. That's a national conservative website. And my latest article, it was enough with this faux outrage about the separation of illegal alien families at the border. It's gone viral on the website. This is a media hyped frenzy at its worst. These laws about the separation of the children from the illegal alien parents, this has been going on for decades. These are laws, and this is based ultimately on a court decision from the federal government, the Flores decision, which ultimately leads to this outcome. It's a
Now, you're talking about immigration laws, or you're talking about domestic criminal laws? Because if you commit a crime and you have children, you have to abandon your children to go serve your sentence.
Honestly, the outcome is the same either way, and that's part of the
Exactly.
reason why this outrage is just nonsensical. Not only that, but you have information that's just been revealed that of the 12,000 children that have come to the border, 10,000 of them came unaccompanied at the outset. So this is just faux outrage, fake, false outrage at its worst.
So the way it works, if I understand correctly, and please correct me, you are the expert. Bunch of middlemen, let's call them, will recruit a bunch of kids with the idea that we're going to take them to the border. If they make it through, then because your kids are in the United States, you could come as a parent to take care of those kids.
Yes, we're
Is
seeing
that the
a
way
lot.
it works?
That's a big part of it. We have coyotes. We have so much human trafficking. Senator Rand Paul just declared this is a form of child abuse for parents to put their children in such harmful situations, bring them across the border. Yes, there are. I mean, rape trees, for example. You have women and children who are sexually assaulted along the journey. I think it was Mr. Camarota who pointed out that if there's a trillion need for asylum and they're fleeing from El Salvador, Mexico provides asylum if they're truly in fear for their lives. Why are they putting their lives further at risk than to come to the United States? I thought that was a really good telling point.
Yeah, but the point, if I may make a point here, is the intention was not to come to Mexico for any reason.
Of course
The
not.
intent is simply come to the United States, and Mexico becomes a traffic point.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, a friend of mine named Gary, he has gone along the U.S.-Mexico border on both sides, and he has reported and recorded that there are signs that direct illegals where to go to, not just Los Angeles or San Diego, but Huntington Park, otherwise known as Illegal Alien Park, where they've even appointed 2 illegal aliens to city commissions. It's outrageous, the attack on the rule of law, and Mr. Raley pointed that out. There are 2 things immediately I want to add to the discussion,
Please.
because essentially what I heard from the 2 policymakers is excellent. To me, the cost of illegal immigration, it goes beyond the drain on our public services. There's the erosion of the rule of law. But the fact is that we have seen 62,000 American citizens murdered by illegal aliens. Not just Kate Steinle was one of the most sensational cases, but I know mothers and fathers whose children have been murdered, and I call it a murder because the pretext of these illegals in our country is a crime in itself. So to me, that adds to the enhancement of the issue. Illegal immigration is
What was
not a
the number
victimless
again?
crime. 60 to 62,000 since
Wow.
9/11.
Wow.
American citizens killed by illegals. I mean, this would be like entire cities being wiped out. I mean, this is unprecedented, and it needs to be confronted. And this issue is never talked about. There is so much whining and complaining from liberal elites, from the celebrities who pretend to care about human life, but they talk about these poor children being separated from their families. What do you say to these parents whose children have been taken from them forever? And I say to your audience, I know these mothers and fathers, Don Rosenberg, Agnes Gibney, Angie Morphine. Their children have been separated from them forever. I just am, it's beyond outrageous to me. It just almost brings me to tears. I am so tired of seeing our media, our corrupt political class, and well-connected elites in this country that they pretend to care about children and wanting to keep families together, but they have no problem and show no compassion for American citizens whose children have been murdered by illegal aliens. And then, of course, we can add on top of that that they just wink at 40 million babies being aborted by abortion mills like Parenthood. The other thing I want to add is the second thing is this concept of cheap labor. It's just not the case. I've spoken to farmers. They communicated with me, like in the Central Valley, for example, when they want to compete legally in the labor and the agricultural market. Illegal aliens who work on these fields, they get lots of benefits during the downtimes, during the non-harvest periods. They get welfare, they get food stamps. This is costing American taxpayers a great deal, in addition to the cost with the hospitals, the schools, the drains on our other public services. There is no such thing as cheap labor. It is expensive. We either recognize that we're paying up front or we're finding all of our social systems are being drained. So that's just a non-starter to me right away. It was good to hear from both of the policymakers. They discuss the fact that the wages are not rising. When you have farmers complaining, and I read a report about this from an avocado farmer, I can't find workers. Yes, because your wages are stagnant or too low for the job market. You need to raise your wages. A professor, Victor Hansen, he's in the Central Valley. He writes extensively against illegal immigration, a great Trump supporter, as am I. And he's pointed out that we are seeing demonstrable effects limiting illegal immigration. I mean, the cost of table grapes has gone up. To be very honest, I don't have a problem paying $2 more a pound for table grapes when, I mean, you heard those figures, $116 to $135 billion is coming out of our pockets and our state coffers to promote and support illegal aliens. Something else, though, if there are any criticisms I have, ultimately with Alex Saab, he is an immigration attorney. There are other immigration attorneys, and they've shared very convincingly, they have clients who have played by the rules, passed all the tests, they've paid all the fees. It's an incredible amount of time and resources to become a legal resident, not even a citizen yet. That's another extended period of time that follows. And it's outrageous to them and frustrating to see illegal aliens who break into our country and want to have all these benefits and want to put our compassion on trial for their children, and yet they don't understand the immense cost and investment that individuals make to come into this country legally. So that's the first thing.
On that point, I would like to make a comment, if I may. We did a show earlier, much earlier, sometimes in October, whereby we tried to compare the status of a legal entrant to this country versus an illegal one. If I leave the country, I come back, right? I have to stand in line. I have to make myself available to any immigration officer who wants to search me or even do a body search on me. I have to declare whatever I have. They have the right to examine my suitcase.
Yes.
They insist on me having the appropriate papers to come in. And that takes literally a lot of time to every person who's trying to enter this country. That's number one.
Yes.
Number two is when you really realize that a guy who sees an open fence in here could jump across it, and suddenly all of these benefits are available to him or her. You, as a citizen of the United States, are appalled by this. Really.
Yes.
I have to stand in line. I have to be searched. I have to go through these machines, detectors and so on and so forth. I have to declare if I have powder now in my suitcase and so on and so forth. Is the fact of the illegality, the fundamental illegality of the act. Those who want open borders, so what's the difference? Let them come in. There is no such thing for an American citizen.
No.
We don't say let the American citizen come in and let us really, whatever there is, whatever impediment there is to them coming in, whatever administrative burdens are imposed on the Americans to come back to his own country, if I are willing to eliminate all of that, maybe I will consider it. But we can't.
Yes. And of course, I wouldn't even want to do that, and I'd like to extend on that
Please.
point. Even if I want to go to another state by airplane, there is a considerable amount of time and process that I have to go through as an American citizen going from one state to another in the same country. I want to further my other departure point with Councilman Saab. You know, SB 54, the supporters of this law, they make the claim that there's a long list, quote unquote, of felonies which state and local law enforcement can still report to ICE. Here's the problem. Many of those felonies are often reduced to misdemeanors. Drunk driving can be reduced to a misdemeanor. You know, I've been to court hearings in the past, and it's amazing to me. People will have like multiple drunk driving offenses. They're listed as misdemeanors. They might serve 1 or 2 days in jail, tops, if there's prior convictions. But ultimately, many of these felonies become misdemeanors. These individuals end up being released back onto our streets. They're called wobblers in the criminal justice system. And to give you further facts on this, San Diego County had to release 300 illegal alien criminals back onto our streets for whatever reason. You have Sheriff Jeff Dean, who commented to the Thousand Oaks City Council. I was there for that. There are further loopholes even within SB 54, clearly, which are allowing violent illegals to come back into our streets. In Orange County,
Are they monitored in any way once they come on the street?
not really, no. I mean, just like any regular criminals, they're able to just, you know, they disappear. Even we see with the catch and release situation, illegals just crossing the border, which is a crime. I'm glad to hear that everybody affirmed that, because some people don't understand that.
Yeah.
This catch and release program, they disappear, they don't show up for their court dates. This is a very common problem. And we have some cities, if not entire counties in the state of California, which cannot adequately staff their police operations as it is. So it's not just the drain on public services, but there are the attrition issues that we face at the local and state level here in the state of California. So
One last point.
I've got to emphasize this.
No, I want you to,
Okay,
but,
go
but
ahead.
that's our last point, because time is up. Please, go ahead.
So you know,
Make your last point,
it's
please.
very important for the country, for the state to understand, for residents to realize that SB 54 is protecting criminals. It is not protecting the otherwise innocent DACA, even though that's been disputed. Tens of thousands of DACA recipients had prior criminal convictions and yet still received the status, which was in itself unconstitutional. I think it is essential that what we see with this border crisis is we need to have a clear, formidable barrier, a wall that makes it evident to the whole world and to any potential migrants, you are not coming in, we will not house you, we will not feed you. That's something too. You want to talk about the drain on resources. We hear all these complaints about the families being separated. These children are getting an adequate, if not superior, education, housing, and nutrition programs than many middle-class families in the United States. And I will go back to my first point. Illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. Every state's a border state. I am fed up. I am tired of hearing about separated families at the border when we have American citizens who have been separated from their children forever.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I am happy to tell you that I think we have done everything we can to expose the ills of illegal immigration. There are some benefits to be sure, but I believe that the cost way outweigh the benefits. I'm glad that you listened. If you have any questions or any concerns, please forward them to us. I am Dr. Joe Khoury, the host of The Conservative Edge. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. This is excellent.